It's not always easy. It's not always well paid, but it is. You'll get a huge amount of enjoyment from it, and you'll have a life that has the potential to open up all kinds of opportunities and experiences, and meet people and go places that you would have never even thought possible.
This is The Bigger Picture, an inside look at the businesses that make the art world work and the stories behind the people that shape them. This show is brought to you by Arcata, the leading due diligence network specifically built for the art market and trusted by over 450 members. To understand how Arcata can help you comply and succeed with challenging regulations, go to arcata.com. Today we are joined by Henry House, Chief Executive Officer of Dreweatts Auction House, who has enjoyed over 30 years' experience in the trade. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to start off with a question we ask all our guests, which is whether you always knew you wanted to work in the art trade or whether it's something that crept up on you a little bit.
Not always consciously, I would say. From a young age, my grandfather started an auction house in the 1930s, and my father used to take me around every Sunday because he was looking for things to buy in the following week's sale. He wasn't involved in the business. His elder brother ran it. But I think obviously there was something subconsciously that might have crept into my head in those early days, although when I left school I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to do. But yeah, so came into it not late in life, but just after school really.
What was the name of the auction house? Is it still running?
House and Son. Yeah.
Ooh. You've never been tempted to return to the family auction business, as it were?
No, sadly, it's not in family ownership anymore.
That's so exciting, though. Okay, so I think your first official sort of dipping your toe into the art valuation or auction trade, apart from your childhood, you actually did a BA in art valuation. Is that right?
So there was a degree in Southampton, which is no longer valid. It was the old valuation course that then became a degree in fine art valuation. So I started there in the early 90s, 92, I think I started. And it was a very interesting course directed to go into the auction world, really. There were lots of elements, from art law and auction law and all aspects of marketing into a bit of the sort of art history side as well, obviously.
I didn't realise there were such courses. And obviously there's masters these days, but in terms of an actual BA in art valuation.
So yeah, it hasn't survived, sadly, but it lasted a number of years. I mean, there's a lot of colleagues who I still know who were on that course as well and who did that course. So there's a number of people still in the business who started on that route.
And I'm guessing at the end of that, it was quite an obvious juncture for you to then go straight into an internship. It feels like quite a nice natural career progression, which is quite rare in the art market. It
is. Perhaps a little fortunate, but yeah, no, I was very lucky to get an internship at Christie's in New York. Which was a bit of a shock to the system the first time, having grown up in Dorset and been at Southampton, suddenly arrived in a very hot August into New York City. And it was a fascinating experience to be sort of plonked straight in. It was when Christie's were in the old 502 Park with the Domenico building there before they moved to Rockefeller Center. And I was very fortunate. I got to move through a number of departments before. I always wanted to sort of be in furniture, but I got to run through a number of departments before I got there. So between prints and old master drawings and carpets before doing about a 6-month stint in the furniture department.
And what sort of tasks were you given? Obviously photocopying, because that was...
photocopying, faxing, obviously, back in the day. Reams of rather faded, crinkly paper everywhere. A lot of tea getting, but really helping shadow some of the specialists with condition reports and helping with the views and starting to write. They were very trusting. They let me write a few catalogue notes. They were well vetted before they were published, but it was a great start, and I was very fortunate to have those beginnings.
And what, I'm guessing you already had this interest in the industry, but what was it about the actual environment that sort of hooked you and made you want to stay in the auction sector?
I mean, there's just the excitement, seeing these, all kinds of different things coming on, being really in the thick of it at that level in New York, was just fascinating. I mean, the things I got to go to see, I sort of rather naively, I didn't really think about it at the time. I had to go and take something when I was working in the print department down to Roy Lichtenstein's studio at the time, and suddenly you found oneself in these places that you could never really imagine, and opened up, the possibility of just what happens in the art world, and seeing all the different items coming up for sale, different categories, would be, through the print department, or the, watching the impressionist sales, and when they were, the auctioneer was still in black tie, and for the evening sales, and it was just a real eye opener, and really made me want to continue the career path in that way.
I think the proximity to the actual objects. I remember when I was an art history student back in London too many years ago now, but I was so used to seeing objects on museum walls and that sort of reverence and that distance with the object. And then our tutor started encouraging us to go down to the auction houses to see their displays, and being able to get that close to objects, let alone handle them, as you were probably going to do. But it was quite a shock to me when I was a student.
Yeah, you have this, it seems unbelievable that you can sort of pick these things up when you first start off, and that you can handle them. And there are these sort of works of art by artists who you've only ever read about, or that are just becoming not accessible, but you're just in such close proximity to. And I think it's very intoxicating to really get to be close and really start to understand and be able to spend time. And I've always tried to encourage people to walk into auction houses, to use them as a gallery, because you see these most amazing works of art that will then disappear from view for the next 20, 30
years. And I was going to say, not always because I think museums, you sort of know what works are where, you've seen them in the books, but a lot of these works from private collections you may never have seen before. They may be lesser known works from artists, so it's just a different experience, isn't it?
Entirely, yeah.
So obviously you were allowed near the catalogues, good start, and you had an interest in furniture. Those two seem to have come together at some point. You became a furniture cataloguer, is that right?
So there was, just as I was finishing my time, there was an opportunity as a junior cataloguer to start at South Kensington in the furniture department. So I applied for that role and was fortunate enough to get that, which was based in the old Christie's warehouse at 9 Elms, which is now buried under the big development next to the American Embassy. But and in those days, it was cataloguing the weekly furniture sales. So we put together weekly sales of 250 pieces of furniture that would go into the sale. So it was a bit of a baptism by fire. I had a little bit of extra training, and then was really sort of thrown in to get on with it. Obviously, I'd have my cataloguing check to start with, but you were really right in amongst all this furniture that then was pouring in every day. There would be people turning up at the shutter doors with carfuls, vanfuls of furniture, wanting to enter them in. So you were put on the spot. You often had to go and talk to clients and value it outside the shutter door. You sometimes got it wrong. You sometimes got it right. But it was an amazing place to learn. It was an extraordinary place to learn, and to be able to learn quickly, really.
I think the scale of turnover of the sales back then in London in particular, in the antiques industry, I'm thinking more like the furniture, as you say, but those are impressionism, all that scale of single collections and etc. It's just working at a different pace, wasn't it?
There were sales every week. I mean, in every category. It was a very different market.
And before Google and AI, so you actually had to do it all yourself, Henry. That must have been quite a shock.
We still do it all ourselves.
Okay, so from there, I want to delve back into how the market's changed at some point, but just looking at your sort of role progression. So you got this sort of junior role as a cataloguer. You then worked, I think, was it 30 years in total you've been in the auction industry?
I started.
Roles.
I started at South Ken I started as an intern in 95 and then started at South Ken in 96. And then at the end of 99, they asked me to go and to move to New York to work in the furniture department there. They needed a role filling, and they very kindly asked me to go. So I arrived back in New York in early 2000 when the Christie's business had relocated to the Rockefeller Center, and it was initially for 2 years, and I had an amazing time in New York as a young man, going back to the city and really working fully in the specialist departments and sort of building my career there and getting to see and understand and engage with the American collectors who were in that sort of golden period of furniture collecting in the sort of 80s and 90s. A lot of the great collections were formed in America. There were plenty made in England as well, but some of the great ones were made in America. So it gave me access to some of those collectors and the American market, which was fascinating. It's a very different insight into the way the auction world works. There's a different way of business getting.
How different?
A bit more transactional, I would say. Perhaps a little less emotion. But it was, and I think, there is more of a transactional nature amongst collectors in America. I think there's a different mindset that these collections are perhaps for a generation, whereas in the UK, because of our history, perhaps these collections are seen to be much longer standing. But it was a great time. The market was still, still is, but it was still very strong. And got to travel all over America and meet collectors, go to the fairs whether in New York or Palm Beach or San Francisco. It was really eye-opening and a great opportunity to sort of learn more about that side of the market.
Oh, sounds like an art historian's dream. Let's go back in time and move to America. By the end, I'm getting this right, you were deputy chairman of English and European furniture and single owner sales.
That was at Sotheby's. So in 2005, Sotheby's approached me to come back and run the English furniture department in London.
Back to the UK again.
Back to the UK. So it was a difficult move, but in the auction world, opportunities to become head of department don't arise very often. And so it was, and I'd been in New York by that point nearly 6 years, and it was coming to a point where I think after that time, you either sort of end up making your life somewhere, within sort of 6, 7, 8 years. If you're living somewhere, you become really rooted. And anyway, there was an opportunity to come back and run the department. So I moved back to Sotheby's on Bond Street as head of the English furniture department started there just in early 2006. And then
Basic question.
Yeah.
I can imagine being a cataloguer, what it entails. Moving from something like that to getting items consigned, I can kind of see how that's building relationships, etc., and valuing still. Running a department, is that quite a different set of skills that you're pulling on? Or did it feel quite organic?
I think at the end of I think you have to lead the department with the skills that you've obtained. It was a slightly daunting step at the time. I think I probably didn't think about it too much. I think you sort of go in, you get on with it.
Always wise, I think. Don't overthink challenges.
It was definitely a challenge. I think at that point, Christie's were a long way ahead of Sotheby's in the English furniture market. There was a lot to do, and it was at a time when the market was not at its strongest point. It was still pretty good then, and before there was a bit of a dip a bit later. But
was that the dip? Was that linked to the 2008 crash?
Yeah, well, it did. Well, there was a bit of a dip there, but then there were sales in 2010. I think was the best year I ever had there, where we were really fortunate, and we had sort of market-defining sales. We had the Chatsworth attic sale, which was extraordinary, and a lot of the fixtures from Devonshire House, which was extraordinarily fun. And I was lucky enough to offer for sale a piece of furniture by Thomas Chippendale, which broke the world record at the time. So we had some great successes, and it was great fun, and there were still a number of really great collectors out there that were still looking for those really connoisseurial collectors that were still looking for that item that had sort of eluded them all those years.
The true collector pieces, those, isn't it? I think when someone's been searching for it their whole lives and then it comes up, that's when the world record. Yeah. After I don't know how many years, you then decide you've moved to your current role, which is Chief Executive Officer of Dreweatts.
Yeah.
What prompted that move? And is that role again is slightly different to a department head? How has that sort of impacted your day-to-day role?
So what prompted the move? I'd been admiring what Dreweatts had done or have achieved and are achieving. I was really drawn to the way they run their business in what is quite a traditional manner, but with the combination of the digital advances that we've really experienced over the last 6-7 years in the auction world in general. And it was that combination of the two, which I think is, we can come on to a bit more, which is driving the success of Dreweatts at the moment. It was an opportunity that was presented to me to come, and I felt that it would be a great new challenge. It's a very different role. I don't spend so much time looking at objects. There's obviously a lot more in terms of the strategy of the business and management of the business that needs to be undertaken. But it's a lovely new challenge. I'm learning things every day that I never thought I'd be learning about, whether it's negotiating contracts for a new warehouse or a million different things that come across my desk every day. And it's not all of it's brilliant, but a lot of it is very it's new, it's fresh, and so I'm really enjoying it. And I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I can still go and see the collectors that I know, work on the things that I like to do. I can be on the rostrum, which I love. I can wander down any day of the week pretty much, and the galleries will be full of objects or paintings or whatever happens to be on sale that week. And in a way, you feel more connected to the objects again, even though I'm not dealing with them so frequently, because they're always just downstairs. I have time, I have to take an interest in every single sale that we're holding. and so you share in all the successes, rather than being perhaps a little bit more compartmentalized in your department in a larger auction house or in a different role. And so it's very invigorating, and it's a beautiful place to work.
I think that's something with all our guests, actually, regardless of what section of the art market that they're in, that idea that every day is different seems to be something that draws all of us into this sector, and that being able to see the pieces of work that which motivate us all in whatever role we have. I wanted to touch a little bit on the market itself. We've sort of already referenced the sort of mass turnover of sales in London at a particular moment, and you've sort of touched on digital, the digital revolution, or whatever we want to call it. I just wanted to start off thinking about the collectors themselves. You've already pulled out this idea of the US collectors to some extent being a bit more transactional than perhaps some of the UK collectors you've worked with. How do you think, or how, if you reflect on the 30 years, are collectors working differently and consistently with the market?
I can really talk more about the sort of furniture and decorative arts market, because that's the area I know, rather than the broader art market. And I mean, that's where I've spent all but 6 months of the last sort of 30 years, pretty much. But I think what we had at the beginning of my career were people who were extremely focused on creating, not all of them, but the very top collectors were extremely focused on creating a world-class collection. They loved the sort of research and academic side of collecting. They were enabled by obviously more auctions to go and look at back in the day, and scores of dealers in London into whose shops they could go, ask questions, be educated, wine, dine. They'd sit there. There were a lot of conversations. So there was an ability for those people starting to collect 30, 40 years ago, maybe even a bit longer, and obviously before then, but to be educated by the market, by the participants in the art market itself. In the furniture market, I mean, it's still possible. There's still a good number of great dealers in London now, but there aren't as many as there were. And so I think what's happened now is that the new generation of buyers and collectors we're seeing are coming in with a more expansive view as well. They're not constrained so much to what perhaps one period or one aesthetic. I mean, in the 80s, people were almost recreating period rooms, whether they were French or English. I mean, that aesthetic has vanished. And people now are mixing much more. And I think if you look at the sensibilities of the sort of current group of collectors and buyers, they buy what they like, they buy what interests them, they want to be intrigued by what they're buying, they want beautiful things around them. I think we're definitely coming back into a period where the more traditional areas are being more valued again. I think people are appreciating how amazing great English and European furniture can be, and that there's a value there in the market still, and the same in some of the more traditional paintings areas. And I think that people are mixing it up, but then they're not shy to throw in a more modern or contemporary work or piece of sculpture, or just in the actual furnishings of their homes, they would use more contemporary soft furnishings. They want to be able to live. They have to be comfortable. It's not got
Does
that
that
formality in
suggest
the same way.
sort of like an emerging confidence in their taste, or is it just a different mindset from sort of recreating history to picking an aesthetic?
I think it's there's probably a yeah, there's I think there is a confidence there definitely with some just to buy what they want, and not be constrained by what they feel they should be buying. I think there is a change of taste. I mean, I think you look at the way the interior magazines are presented now. You go to the decorative arts fair in Battersea and just see what you go and shop for, and I think there are no constricting norms now to how people can furnish their house, and they can choose what they want. And I think there's a lot of, I mean, it's so easy now to pick up your phone and, if you spend an hour scrolling on whichever platform you choose, you can find an interior or a number of interiors or pages that inspire you, that you want to recreate. And I think we are, if you're that way inclined and you're interested, there's so much available to look at now that was, beyond the half a dozen or dozen interior magazines that people would have had to subscribe to 20 years ago.
If that.
Yeah,
It was
exactly.
like three. And as part of that, I mean, that sort of leans towards taste and sort of aesthetic. Another conversation that's been happening around the art market, or has developed around the art market more over those 30 years, is the idea of art and antiques as an investment. And a growing consciousness of that with collectors. We've got a lot of talk at the moment about a great wealth transfer and younger generations thinking about assets differently. Is that something that's factoring into motivations for buying?
I have always been a starch opponent to looking at buying art or furniture as an investment. Um, I think maybe people do feel that I think there's two aspects to it, aren't there? If you're going to go and buy some modern furniture from wherever it may be, from high street chains to slightly more niche markets, the value is probably going to drop almost immediately. You take it out of the showroom or from the shop or wherever you've bought it. I think there is an understanding, and I think we're seeing it with some of the younger generation coming through, that these things may not be an investment, but they're also likely to hold some value rather than be disposable at the end of their use by that particular owner. And so I think, along with the sort of green credentials of buying antique furniture, I think there is an understanding now that it's possible to go and buy really quite a good bit of furniture for £500 or £600, and you can put it into your first home, and you can enjoy it for the next however many years, and there will still be a residual value to it. And I think people are starting to understand that in the entry level of the market. I think when you get higher up in the market, I think you've got to be passionate about what you're buying. You've got to like what you're buying. You've got to enjoy what you're buying. If it makes you money along the way, well, that's wonderful. But that would never be my advice for a reason for investing certainly in the decorative arts. You've got to want to own these things.
Yeah, it's more a factor to consider rather than a driving motivation as such.
Yeah.
I wanted to pick up on something else you mentioned as well, about digital. Obviously, the art market's been developing as platforms a lot over the 30 years, and with the pandemic, there was a huge acceleration, I guess, of the role that online platforms would play, particularly for auction houses. How has that changed your relationship with collectors and how they're behaving, and what is it, Dreweatts is really focusing on in that area? Because you said you admired their work there.
Well, I think when lockdown happened and we all had to adapt, the art market, the auction world had to adapt very quickly to something that we really didn't know how long it would last. I mean, I think there's been lots of commentary on this over the years. It fast forwarded the use of tech, the use of online auctions. I don't know, 3, 5, 10 years. I mean, I think you can argue that it really pushed it forward. And there has always been a reluctance to change in the auction world, and this was essential, and it pushed it through at a pace that would have taken a lot longer, I believe, to have happened. What it's done for Dreweatts is, I think, and what I love about Dreweatts is that we have maintained the really traditional core way of selling as an auction house, printing catalogues, placing everything on view, making sure it looks fantastic, getting those catalogues to all our buyers. And so Dreweatts has managed to maintain that very traditional core buyer base. And what has really pushed the success of the business as well is then having that access to a global audience, who can see our catalogues online, either in a sort of flippable form or the online listings, to the point now where our second biggest buyer market is in the US. We're seeing a lot of activity from the US. We're seeing growing numbers of clients buying from mainland Europe. We're seeing a lot from Asia and India. So there are no limits now to how people can access what you're doing, and that is really exciting, and it's been transformational for all auction houses. But I think for those outside of the major international auction houses, there is no limit to the people that you can reach now. And if you present things in the right way and you start to build a sound reputation for great product, for reliability, for honesty, for professionalism, there is absolutely no reason why nobody from anywhere in the world wouldn't be comfortable in bidding with you. And people have the confidence now to buy online without seeing things in a way that, when I started in the business, would have just been almost inconceivable.
It's really interesting though, isn't it? When you started out speaking about like maintaining that in real life experience as well, and the publishing of things, because I think during the pandemic or immediately afterwards, there was a lot of concern or discussion around, will we, has everything changed forever? Will we just be online now? Is there a role for fairs, displays? And actually what's happened generally in the market is kind of what you're outlining here, where there's actually a greater appreciation of those traditional in-person experiences. It's just that additional layer of being able to reach more people and global attention that's been added on top. But I wonder, obviously, you've described geography there, being able to reach more buyers. Is it also changing the type of buyers you're engaging with? Are there new people accessing the market that perhaps you weren't engaging before?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. Well, we're seeing probably about 10% new buyers a year coming into our sales. Dreweatts are on lots of the sort of consolidation platforms, which are bringing in, give a shop window to clients that may not have heard of Dreweatts before. And we're seeing a lot of participation coming in from Europe through some of those sites. So I think there's definitely, we see constantly, we're seeing new people come into the marketplace, and I think we're at a level where we're selling things from a few £100 to several 100,000. So we are catering to that sort of entry level market, along with being able to cater to those more established collectors that want to buy great works of art.
It's definitely a more accessible way into the market, isn't it, than the somewhat intimidating sale rooms of old and some of the white cube galleries. Another thing that's sort of been a trajectory in your career around sort of single owner sales or single collections. That's become more and more prominent actually in discussion around art markets. If you look at some of the reports, the major auction houses, Christie's, Sotheby's, they've relied quite heavily on single owner sales to keep their turnover at the level they need, particularly over the past 5 years. What is it about that is becoming so important for the market? Is it the storytelling and that idea of being able to create that narrative around works of art that's landing really well with collectors, or is it just the quality of works that were in those collections and trying to be able to find a supply of decent artworks in these areas is increasingly difficult?
People respond amazingly well to a story. That is what first captures people's imagination. And that can be regarding the contents of a collection. It can be regarding the collector themselves. It can be the location of the collection, the house, the interior designer who was responsible for helping form the collection. But people love the fact that there's a narrative to the collection, and I think that garners a huge amount of interest. It also gives great comfort to people to be able to buy from a collection where it's been pre-curated. The selection process has been done. If you engage with the items in that sale or the look of the sale, it gives you an ability to take confidence from what you're buying, that somebody has already made that selection and you are in a way reaffirming that selection. I think we saw it, recently we hold the collection of Patrick and Annabelle Lindsay, Patrick having been the former head of Old Masters at Christie's. I mean, they had huge numbers of friends and were, highly feted, but the sort of look, the fact that he'd been involved in the art world, she'd been a sort of fantastic designer, it engaged with people. And we had people coming in that wanted to buy a little bit of that because they loved the look and they love to put things in. And who doesn't love a story? It's great to have something in the corner of the room or hanging on your wall that came from somebody's, some great collection or has a wonderful, interesting story about it. And I think that's where a lot of today's collectors are wanting things that become talking points, that are interesting, that can provoke a conversation. It's not just about, having some wonderful obscure piece of furniture or something because you love it, but I mean, it still is for some of us. But it's about having these items that really have a history and a story. And I think that is playing an increasingly important role in the market at the moment.
I love a provenance story, but I'm sure it's very frustrating to the purists amongst you. So Dreweatts has just published its first annual report. I think you're going to be doing these ongoing, and it's quite optimistic, I think, in terms of the collecting landscape. Were there any surprises in the findings? Because I know when you start pulling data together on your day-to-day things, often it just reaffirms your assumptions, but I wondered if there was anything in there that sort of surprised you or your team.
I think I've not been here that long, but I think I've been following what was going on, and I don't think there was anything that really shocked us.
That's probably a good sign.
Yeah, I was in any way I was very pleasantly surprised when you look at the figures for the really traditional areas, the furniture market, the old master paintings market. For Dreweatts, we sold over £9 million in the furniture market last year, and that's not even taking into account all the furniture that we sold in single owner sales last year as well. So, I think that when people say there's no market for antique furniture, that it's not true. You can see it there on the page right in front of you. The same for the old master paintings departments. They had some fantastic results last year. If you can find good, attractive, fresh property, bring it to the market. It's sensibly priced, well presented. There's a strong market out there for these things. No doubt. And those sales are selling 80% of, they have an 80+% sell-through rate. And it's credit to the team here for presenting them so well and getting their pricing right. But when people say, oh well, the antique furniture or the brown furniture market, which I hate, is dead, just not true. Just not true.
That's really positive. And ending on a equally positive note, I hope. If you did meet someone, a lot of our listeners are someone either starting out in the art market or have got a certain point in their career and sort of rethinking routes, what advice would you give them about joining the sector or navigating their way through it?
As collectors?
No, as professionals, someone who's thinking about
professionals. Be interested, be open, be willing to get your hands dirty, do anything.
Move to New York every few years.
Well, yeah, that doesn't always happen. But be open to those opportunities. Be open to any possibility. Take your chances. And I can't promise, but I think if in this world, if you work hard, you show interest, you're engaged, you could. It's an amazing world to work in. It's not always easy. It's not always well paid, but it is. You'll get a huge amount of enjoyment from it, and you'll have a life that has the potential to open up all kinds of opportunities and experiences, and meet people and go places that you would have never even thought possible.
Well, that is a positive way to end. I'm going to leave that there. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're really busy and this report's coming out, so I've probably got loads of emails to tackle. But thank you for joining us. It's been really interesting to hear more about you.
My pleasure, Ria. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for listening. You can follow and subscribe to The Bigger Picture wherever you get your podcasts. And to learn more about this episode or to reach out to us directly, please visit us at rcarter.com.